Hello guys, welcome to my first tutorial on working with API using Ruby on Rails. In this tutorial, we're going to use the Httparty gem to call the API endpoint, get a response, and display the response on our view. So let's get started. Let's create our application. Go to your terminal and type in Rails, if I can spell, Rails, new. I'm going to call my application Ruby on Rails API, and I also like to skip the Git components because this is not going to go into any Git repository, so I'm just going to say skip Git. Now you can keep the Git repository configuration if you want, but I like to skip it. The next thing we want to do is download the gem file that we need. So go to your terminal, go into the project and type in bundle add httparty. So as you can see, it's installed the gem. So I like to just run bundled install. Great, so let's open our project and see what we have. As you can see, Rails has generated all the files that we need. So the first thing I like to do is just run the app and see if it's working as we expect. So type in Rails pass. Now let's go localhost 3000. Great, so it's working as we expect. Let's stop this server. Now let's quickly show you the API endpoint that we're going to be calling. For this tutorial, we're using a API provided by Stack Overflow. I'll leave it in the description, but of course you can use your own API. So let's go back to our application and generate a controller with a view attached to it. Now we're not going to worry about model because all our data will be coming from the API. So we can skip the model section altogether. Now go back to your application and type in Ruby bin/Rails, and then we want to generate controller. We're going to call this controller call API and a view page called index. Nice. So now that the controller has been generated, let's see what we have. Go to app controller. We have a controller called call API, and we also have a view called call API and index. Great, so we have everything that we need. Now let's call the API and see what information we get. Go back to your controller, index file. Let's create a variable for our API endpoint. We're going to say API underscore URL equals. Let me quickly copy and paste the URL. Okay, and now we're just going to call the Httparty gem. Use the GET request, pass in the API URL, and we want to target the body. Let's save the response within a variable called response. And one thing I like to do when I'm working with the API is type the console command here. So this gives us a little console within our browser so we can actually view what our variable has. So let's save that. And also go back to the view, just dump all the information that we are receiving from the API. So our variable called response. Okay, let's go to our endpoint, which is, if we look at our project again, it's called call underscore API and then index. So let's just type that in, call underscore API and then index. Great, we have all the information that our API is returning. And this is the console section, so you can actually type in the variable name. So we try to look at response, and you can see all the information our variable is storing. Great, so I'm just going to tidy this up a little bit. And if we look at the JSON file, I just want to target the tag section of each object. First, need to parse this data into a JSON format. So to do that, we can use the JSON module and parse this response that we are receiving from Httparty, save that into our response variable. So since we just want to display all the tags. Let's do a unordered list, and let's do a for loop on our response. We need to have the @ sign, and then we want to target the items field. And we want to go and do each item, call a variable called item in the for loop. So within each item, we want to target the tags array. Tags is also an array, so if we want to target this array, we'll say item target the tags array, and for each of the item within the tags array, create a variable called tags and end the loop and to a list item, and within that we just want to display whatever's within this tag variable. Let's save that. We have this response, so let's get rid of that and rerun the page again. Nothing is showing. I wonder why. Oh, that's because we're not actually returning the variable. There we go. Okay, let's go back to our controller and let's optimize this further. So one thing you'll notice is every time we refresh the page, it takes a few seconds for the data to go to the API endpoint, collect the information, and parse the data. So to see exactly how long it takes, you go back to a console and just look at how long it took for that request to complete, for the page to fully render. It took 576 milliseconds. Sometimes it takes longer depending on your network connection, but we can make this so much faster. To do that, run Rails dev and then cache. This should enable caching within dev config. That one is now being cached. So let's go back to our controller and we want to do a couple of things here. We want to modify this to use the Rails cache method. So let's go and type in Rails cache dot fetch. So what we're trying to do here is we're going to fetch the data within our cache using a unique key. So our key would be API call. Let's say you can have whatever you want within this. Now we also need to provide how long we want to keep this cache. So let's put in expire tag. Expires in _in. I'm just going to say for now 1 hour, right? And if we do not have any data within the cache, I wanted to actually go to the API endpoint, get the data, and save the information within our cache. Just to see how this has improved my application, let's go back and run our server again. So you can see it will allow me a second to complete this request. So if we refresh the page again, it took 21 milliseconds, fraction of a second, to prove that we are using the Rails cache system. Let's go back to our application, and within the console, let's type in rails.cache.fetch, and we're going to provide our unique key, which is API_call, and we should get back the API details. And there we go. These are all the data that are being retrieved from our API, and it's saved within the cache. So now every time we refresh the page, we're always going back and hitting the cache rather than calling the API endpoint over and over again. Hopefully that shows you how we can use the Httparty gem to call the API endpoint and save our response within cache for improved performance. Thanks for watching.